Thank you. Okay, thank you. Next, we have the Finance Committee report. The committee chair, Jennifer Gravitt.
We have standards assessment first.
Oh, excuse me. Standards and Assessment Committee report. Thank you.
Okay, we're doing standards and assessment because if this is finance, then I better go home. Okay, so we have 4 actionable items, and our first one is 13.2, the K-5 Computer Science Standard Request for Approval. We had a great discussion on this. They've had their 30-day public comment period from May to June 2019, and after our discussion, added a couple things. For example, instead of a password, we now have passphrase. Thank you, Board Member Cannon. But the motion for the board is the committee moves that the board approve the K-5 Computer Science Standards Draft 4.
Okay, the motion before us is to approve the K-5 Computer Science Standards Draft 4. Is there any discussion to that motion? Board Member Earl.
Yes, I listened to both this time and last time because you guys continued it in your meetings. And I felt like there was great dialogue and changes. Board Member Cannon did a great job of sorting through those. There was one comment brought up at the, August meeting that I wanted to just comment on, and that it had to do with maybe the appropriateness in the younger grades of even having a set of standards. You know, at what point is it just another thing? Mm-hmm. Do you know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. That you add to the day, because this is adding to a elementary teacher's.
Right, and that was one of our concerns.
Yeah.
That's huge.
So maybe someone can address that. How do we balance that out? How does this add to and not just become another thing to do? Mm-hmm. When you could almost argue some of these kids already know how to do all this,
right.
The things we're asking them to do, and on top of that, the idea that it won't be easily picked up in a 3rd grade on. So if you could address that, I would appreciate it. Okay. Go ahead.
I'm Ashley Higgs, the CTE Education Specialist. So that is one big concern that we wanted to do. One of the big things we focused on is that we want to have this as an integrated part, not as a siloed added on. So as we are working on the core guides and with the standards, we are aligning it to the math as well, as so that it's showing a new way of teaching the same concept in math, but using computer science practices.
Board Member Earl, do you have a follow-up? Okay. Seeing no further lights, the motion before us is to approve the K-5 Computer Science Standards Draft 4. Okay, Board Member Earl?
What was the comments returned? I'm sorry, and those were probably included, but what were the comments during the public comment
30
period?
day.
So a majority of it was where was keyboarding and why wasn't keyboarding included in the computer science. So the big thing is that we didn't want teachers to think that teaching keyboarding at the elementary level was teaching computer science. They're totally 2 separate things. Other than that, it was very positive. They were excited about it. There wasn't really much negative feedback.
Did you have teacher feedback on it at all?
We had a teacher feedback as well as some board member feedback.
Okay.
So.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The motion before us is to approve the K-5 Computer Science Standards Draft 4. Seeing no further discussion, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? That motion passes unanimously.
Okay, our next actionable item is 13.4, which is R277108, the Annual Assurance of Compliance by Local School Boards. This is an amendment, and it just needed to incorporate the reference to updated version of the assurances document. We had a discussion about having staff come back with suggestions for acceptable examples of evidence that we'll talk about later, but the motion before the board right now is the committee moves that the board approve R277108 Draft 1 on second and final reading.
Okay, the motion from committee is that the board approve R277108 Draft 1 on second and final reading. Is there any discussion to that motion? Okay, seeing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that motion passes unanimously.
Okay, next item is 13.5, R277468, the Parent Guardian Review of Public Education Curriculum and Review of Complaint Process. This was an amendment and a continuation, and as we had our discussion, really the only change was to change the word "a parent" to make it plural to parents, and then we made that consistent throughout the rule. The motion before the board is the committee moves that the board approve and continue R277468, Draft 2 on second and final reading.
Okay, the motion before us is to approve and continue R277468 Draft 2 on second and final reading. Any discussion? Board Member Belknap.
May I address the committee chair?
Yes.
Thank you. Jenny, I'm just curious as to why you put, even though it's parent before, and you changed it to parents, but the title is parent/guardian. Why did we eliminate guardian in the rest of it?
That's a really good question that I would like our famous
Does
Jeffrey
parent-
Van Holten.
Does parent incorporate that, or does guardian? I'm
I
not sure.
think, yes, we had that in the,
Okay.
Jeff, let me have Jeff respond to that. I had a memory. Go ahead. Thank you.
Yes, Jeff Van Holten,
One
Policy
memory.
Advisor. You have pointed out a typo, and we will correct that. Parent is defined in Rule 100
Yeah.
to include guardian,
Yeah.
so that should have been caught. We should take out guardian.
Take out guardian.
Yep, yep.
Because we talked about that,
Yep.
and then it was defined, so.
Thank you.
Oh, Laura, great question.
Okay, Board Member,
Good one today.
One for
Board Member
one.
Earl.
Yeah, my question is, on line 64 through 67-ish, it just says, an LEA may request the board provide the LEA resources for effective parent participation in the instructional materials review or compliant process. What is, we crossed out board for definition, so the board would be us?
Yes.
Okay, and what are the resources we're intending to provide?
So currently, I am not aware that we actually have specific resources. We've actually never had a request from an LEA on how to incorporate parents into this process. They've never gone to the state board level and made the request. So we changed it. We softened the language to say if there's a request, we would provide resources. We do not keep any on hand. I think that would be handled on a case-by-case basis with staff to just work with the LEA on what would be best for getting parents involved. Typically, the LEAs have been finding their own ways to make sure parents are involved in this process.
Okay. Okay, I guess I was just wondering, I don't know what the board's role would be in there. So that's why I was wondering, what does this mean? But we're not sure what that means because we haven't had a request, right?
We've
Am I
never had a
understanding that?
request, right,
If we had a
so-
request, then we'd know what that means?
We would figure that out, yes.
Okay. I guess, yeah, how or what would the board provide? So that's along this similar,
Chair, if I may, I think one of the
Yeah.
things that we would probably offer is make sure that we've gone through with the requester, if they've gone through the process of, have you talked to your school community council? Have you talked with your local PTA to make sure that they have reached out to get parents involved? Because I would assume that the issue here is how do we get parents to show up and be involved in this process? But that's just an assumption on my part.
can
Yes, one more
I
question.
make an amendment or an addition?
You can make a motion for amendment.
Just a
yeah, I don't
clarification, should it be draft one? Because there's only draft one on board docs, or on civic clerk. And draft one looks like it takes into account the changes.
So.
Okay.
We probably
So
need to adjust
draft
that to say draft one.
So the motion before us is the board approve and continue R277468 Draft 1.
Yes,
On
I think
second and
so.
final reading, okay?
So I would like to make an amendment, I'm not sure where this needs to go, but where we actually include in here that there's a time frame of a response from an LEA to a parent if they have a complaint or a curriculum question. So it's just not out there. And maybe the LEAs build it into their complaint policy, but I think, is that appropriate, maybe? Maybe I'm asking a question.
So if you want to make an amendment, so the motion is to amend or to add in a timeline to the complaint process.
Yes.
Is that correct, from an
I'm
LEA?
not sure where to put that.
So Deputy Superintendent Patty Norman, if you'd like to speak to that.
I'm not sure if I'm speaking to that motion, but I wanted to clarify on a comment that was previously made. So each LEA has an instructional materials review process, and AAG Michelle Buse was looking, it's in statute. And with that, parents are involved in that process. So each LEA then makes sure that those parents are involved, that they have open house, there's set things that each LEA makes sure are done. So I don't know if that was a part of your process or your question about what are the resources. So those things are really
Okay.
defined out in the LEAs. Parents are involved, they have an open house, it's for this long, and those things are clearly defined at the LEA level.
So if there's a complaint, is that normally, okay, I'm getting it. So maybe there's not a need for an amendment to include that in here?
Right, you're right.
Is that accurate?
They do handle that.
At the LEA level,
Okay,
yeah.
so then I withdraw my
Okay.
motion there.
So just a point of clarification that there is an actual draft 2. Is there any way that the board could see the difference between draft 1 and draft 2 prior to the vote?
Is it much different?
There's no draft true on Civic Clerk.
Yeah, and draft 1 is wrong. We looked through it. It doesn't have the changes.
Okay. Then we will need to make that.
So can we postpone, okay, we'll postpone this motion until the
We can
end
see it.
of it, until it's able to be uploaded and board members can see the changes on draft 2. Okay, thank you.
So go ahead.
Yes,
Okay,
please.
our last, well, not our last, but now our last actionable item is 13.6. R277623, which is the school climate survey. This is new. House Bill 120 requires the board to create rule regarding the content and format of a school climate survey. And we talked about directing staff to address the issue of data access in the rule. And then we also added acoustics in terms of a question about things that hinder teaching. And I thought that was good. So the motion before the board is the committee moves that the board approve R277623 Draft 2 on second and final reading.
Okay, the motion from committee is that the board approve R277623 Draft 2 on second and final reading. Is there discussion to that motion? Board Member Belknap.
Sorry.
Never
May I
apologize.
ask the committee chair?
Yes, please.
Thank you directly. Who created these questions?
Oh, my goodness. Let's have.
And can we also invite Sarah Young up?
Yes.
Hi there. So Sarah Young, implementation coach here at the Utah State Board of Education. These questions were drafted using multiple resources by our school safety coordinator, Christy Walker, in partnership with multiple members of her team and staff.
Yes.
Are these available in different languages or only English?
Great question. Currently, we only have them available in English, but that's definitely something staff can look into.
Okay, one
Yes,
more.
go ahead.
Sorry. Oh, wait, Jenny's on. I'll wait. I'll wait my turn.
Okay. Board Member Earl?
I would like to make an amendment on line, this is the, okay. And I just moved my thing. Line 38, it says an LEA may include additional questions in the LEA's climate survey. And I would like to add in compliance with 53E-9-203. And that just, that references the privacy as far as surveys, what can be addressed without parental consent, what without a parent opt-in.
Okay. So the amendment is to add into line 38, in compliance with 53E-9-203?
What's that?
Did
Oh,
I get it correct?
yes.
Okay. Is there a second to that amendment?
Second.
Okay, any discussion to that motion? Okay, Board Member Linda Hansen?
Well, I think we ought, whoops, sorry. I just need a minute to look at 59, 53G, let's see, what is it, 53E,
9.
59-203.
Yeah, can we have a couple minutes to look at that first,
Yep.
to make sure that it complies? It's the right thing.
Do you have any input you'd like to add to that, Ms. Jeff? If you-
We can add that in, that's not a
Okay.
problem.
Okay, so the board member Hanson,
Oh, yeah,
is that?
That would align. That
Okay.
would not be a problem.
Okay, that's enough time? Okay, so the motion before, seeing no further questions or discussion, the motion before us is to amend line 38 to add in compliance with 53E-9-203. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that motion passes unanimously. Okay, so back to the main motion, which is to approve R277-623 Draft 2 on second and final reading as amended.
I have a question.
Okay, Board Member Earl?
We're not voting on the survey, but if we have question about the survey questions, am I accurate in that we're not voting about the survey? Or we vote, is our vote to, it's just the to policy,
Okay.
right?
Yeah, it's incorporated by reference, so you are voting on the survey
Okay,
questions as well.
so then I do have some questions specific to the survey.
Okay,
So
good.
so there are 4 surveys here, correct? Or is there 5? 5 surveys?
Yeah, sorry, one.
So if I'm understanding it right, there's a parent, there's
There's
an
7.
educator,
7.
there's a administrator, there's a, okay, and then there are 3 youth surveys, 1 for adolescents. What is the breakdown of the other 2 surveys? What is the age groups?
Sure. So there are actually 7 different stakeholder
Okay.
groups. And so the breakdown of the 3 that are directed at students are 6 through 12, 3 through 5, and then K2.
And will the 3 through 5, will those be anonymous, and will the students be reading those on their own?
Yes. So in the language that we have associated with this survey, just 2 points of clarification. We are asking that the LEAs give the survey. There's nothing that compels a student to have to respond. They also have the opportunity to skip questions. So there's nothing that compels them to have to answer
Okay.
every single one.
So I just have on that particular survey, which I think I narrowed which one it was, it didn't identify on there,
Okay.
unless I missed that. There are some vocabulary words that I wonder if a child, and I could be wrong, you can just tell me if I'm wrong, I just wonder if you have any struggling readers that they may not know, for example, graffiti, recognized, or expectations. I just think we might want to look at make sure that the language, if it's not being read to them, does that make sense? That they would be familiar with it and be able to answer the question without. Okay, so that's just one thing. So I don't know, do I need a motion for that? Or is that just something they can address?
Yeah.
I just want to make sure if it's not being read to them that they're not limited on, yeah, okay. So just checking the language on that. So,
Which that's already built in for kids.
okay, and then the younger grades will be read to them?
The K2 was designed so that a teacher could ask those questions towards a student and they could give a response.
Okay. So on the high school survey, and I think I have 10 written by it, so I'm assuming it's maybe to question 10. It says, I have heard this type of language, swearing, racist, sexual, threatening, and then it goes on, there's several other, I think they could probably mark everyone or none of what they've heard at their school. What do we want? What's the purpose in that? Once we get the information, what do we want to do with that information? Do we want to do an anti-swearing program? And the reason why I'm asking that is we could ask the negative elements, and in most part, I feel like the questions are they're put together in a very positive way, but there's only 1 or 2 questions. This is one of those that ask for the negative aspect. And I understand we're looking at safety, but we could also ask from a positive end of it, and if they aren't responding to the positive, you still get the negative. So I guess, what do we want from this? Well, when you get the information, do we want to do an anti-swearing, an anti, sexual language campaign? What is it we're going to do with it once we get it?
Yeah, so I think twofold. So in regards to the way the survey is structured, this information would be available at a local level to be able to inform that like local level decision making in regards to if it is something where a lot of kids are maybe experiencing swearing, that's something that they're familiar with in their community. Great, I'm glad we have Christy. The second thing that I would state, it also helps to inform in terms of USBE if there are prevalent themes that are happening across multiple LEAs. It also helps to direct staff in regards to some of their time and efforts in the creation of resources and trainings for teachers to be very specific to meet the needs of the community, as opposed to right now, I think there are often times where as staff, we're trying to address a lot of components without clearly knowing which ones really need to be prioritized in terms of meeting a community need. Christy, if you would like to. Board Chair.
Christy Walker, Safe and Healthy Schools Coordinator. One of the elements within that question is targeting any sort of non-inclusive behavior within the school environment. So if we were to ask, have you heard racist language or language you would deem as racist within your hallways or within your school building? That is, again, only targeting one aspect. Whereas some students may not deem certain language a certain way or have that perspective, but the U.S. Department of Education actually broke down each of those aspects into different questions. Whereas we felt like, let's just do an all, circle all that apply. And then that way you can really gauge, are students feeling like they're harassed? Because if there's a lot of sexual conversations in the hallway, there's going to be a feeling of being uncomfortable. And that was another way of possibly asking that question, but what does uncomfortable mean when you hear uncomfortable language or language that makes you feel uncomfortable? That doesn't give us an idea of the perceptions or the real behaviors or the conversations that they're overhearing within that school. So we do want to know from a risk factor perspective and a negative perspective, what are some of the elements that are really impacting the student's personal perception of safety within that school? And then that way you can provide more protective factors. You can provide more education around appropriate language, appropriate interaction, appropriate social behaviors. And I've spent 10 years at a junior high, so yeah, we do want to know
I still wonder
those things.
if we can get similar information by asking it in a positive way instead of a negative way. Meaning, if you're not seeing that, then there needs to be an increase of the what we want to see instead of measuring what we don't want to see. Because I think it drives children's minds to they're looking for the negative aspects of their community instead of asking. And anyways, so yeah.
One of the things in creating surveys, and I'm sure many of you are aware as you've been trained on how to read or create surveys, is if we ask it in one way, then we need to ask it in another way. So there's other questions within here. I feel welcome, the school encourages me, I feel comfortable. And so to find the balance between those two, if we ask it all positive and then we ask it all in a different way, then we can find a balance between the two instead of just asking one way or just asking another. And so this is also the attempt to find the balance between the two.
Okay, thank you.
Board Member Scott Hansen?
Just a couple of quick things. First line 54 talks about an LEA restricting access, and there's a may there that I think should be a shall. Shall restrict access to survey responses in accordance with policies, board rules, state and federal. That shouldn't be optional. The other one, I'm not sure how really to address. Line 42 says that this should be anonymous and randomized. We're going to be talking to these little kids. Teachers are going to be delivering this verbally to the kids. That's certainly not going to be anonymous. I just want to make sure we're all okay with that because the teachers are going to know which answers are coming from which kids.
You want to address that? You did not hear that.
Sorry.
Yes.
You want to?
So one thing that can be considered, especially for those non-readers where teachers are asking the question, is if you have an aide read the questions, or you get a member of the PTA that can read those questions, someone that does not necessarily identify each student, they can assist in that way. So there are ways, absolutely, for keeping their answers anonymous and not targeting or calling them out.
Do we address that somehow in the instructions on how to administer?
Yeah, the surveillance will have instructions attached to it, so that's something we could include. Yes. Very good point.
So just for clarification, Board Member Hanson brought up something on line 54. Is that a typo, or is that a substantive change, the may to the shall?
We can change that to shall.
Typo, okay.
It was intended to be a may, but if we can make it a shall, if that's what the board
So
wants.
that should be an amendment. Okay, so that's going to require a motion, Board Member Hanson.
Also to address the survey for kids in younger grades.
So let's be very, okay, board members, we've got a motion before us. Is there a second to the motion? Okay, so the motion before us is to amend line 54 from a may to a shall, and also address the anonymity question, anonymity, did I get it right? Anonymity question for students who will have the test or the survey read to them. That is the amendment. Is there any discussion to that amendment? Board Member Earl, are you for that amendment? No. Board Member Lear is.
Yeah, I think we need a little more, as I was thinking this as Scott raises those questions, which any of us could have raised. So I'm kind of a little sheepish that I didn't look at those also. But I think it needs to be a little broader than that. It's not just the anonymity of the students. I think there needs to be some language in here about the importance of the confidentiality of these responses. And I think there needs to be something in there about a child being able to request a different adult to be able to ask him questions if he feels uncomfortable with one adult. And so I think that maybe that whole idea needs to be fleshed out a little more. So that the confidentiality language is in this rule, not just in the instructions, and the sort of the protection of all the people involved. Because if you want authentic information, it could be it could be hard for some kids to say, and you don't want an aide. I don't want an aide administering that, because then you'll have very confidential information that an employee might treat differently than an aide would. So I just think you need to flesh that whole issue out a little bit better. So I guess my motion is, I agree on the shall. I think the staff needs to work on this a little bit more and bring it back to us.
Okay.
But now we can't have
So
another
the
motion.
rule, so are you trying to amend address the anonymity portion of Board Member Hanson's motion?
Yes, in that, I think it's a little more than just an anonymous kind of.
So would you like your motion to expand and say anonymity and confidentiality
Yes.
of the test taker?
But I don't think we can do it on the fly.
survey taker.
I was saying, I
correct.
just think you need to consider a number of those issues a little more thoroughly.
Correct. So the motion isn't to put the wording in. The motion is for staff to address
Yes.
the anonymity and confidentiality. And just-
And just protection of children's sense, I don't know even how to say it. It's allow for children to ask for a different questioner. It's kind of broad.
Okay. So your motion, are you making a motion?
Well, Scott made the one motion.
So you would be making an
A substantive
amendment.
motion.
No.
Yeah.
So you want to refer the rule
I
back
do.
to staff?
I think it needs more consideration of those issues.
Okay, so that would take this off the table and refer this whole
Yes,
rule
that would
back
be
to
my
staff.
motion,
Okay,
my substitute motion.
Okay, so Board Member Lear's motion is to refer this rule back to staff, and so all of the other amendments would be on hold until this goes back to committee if this motion to refer passes. So the motion has been made and second.
Do I need to withdraw the previous
No,
motion for that?
so it's just a motion that would just stop everything else and move it back to committee. So the motion now before us is to refer this rule back to committee to consider some of the questions of confidentiality, safety, the feelings of comfort of students as they take this test. Any discussion to that motion to refer? Okay, Board Member Bolter, you're speaking to the motion to refer. Okay, go ahead.
I'm in support of that motion, and I would just like to also ask staff, while they're looking at it, for the anonymous portion, anonymity, for those non-readers, perhaps it could be sent home with them or to the parents, and then the parents can ask the questions. Like, that could also be an option, so it's not a school employee or an aide or whatever.
Okay, Board Member Newell, are you speaking to this motion?
I want to speak to the same thing, the anonymity. But for the younger ages, have you considered just color coding those questions?
Or like a
So that,
shapes or
yes,
something.
yeah, so that way they can do it
They
in
can
class,
do
but
their
they would-
answers.
no one would still know who they are or who's doing the answer. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
That's a good idea.
Chair Huntsman.
Yeah, so, board members, this is still an opportunity. This is going back to committee. So anything that you have, this isn't the place to pile on all your requests unless the chair wants it to happen. But you do have the opportunity to send your request to staff and/or to the chair, vice chair, to make sure whatever it is that you're not liking about this, or what you might discover tomorrow that you might not like about it, that's the time to knock it out in committee.
Board
That
member-
opportunity exists.
Are you speaking to the motion to refer? Okay.
I'll just write a note.
Okay. So the motion before us is to refer R277623, draft 2, back to committee. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, that motion passes unanimously. Okay, so then we will, it has our number 13.5. Do we have draft 2 uploaded at the moment? Yes, no? Okay, so that, we'll come back to that after the other committee reports. Is that the conclusion of your report? Okay, thank you.